You're watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV from Toronto, Ontario. This is Samia Sayed. Welcome to the show. Joining us very shortly is Brother Mohammed Maxwell Hassan on strategies of communication. But first, let's take a look at some headlines. Quebec court starts hearing appeals about Bill 21. Climate policies not supported by majority of Canadians. 2 Muslim women awarded Order of Vaughan. Cluster bomb kills 10 in a Syrian refugee camp. And now the details. Quebec's highest court is hearing appeals today about the province's secularism law, Bill 21, reports a media source. The law prohibits public workers in positions of authority, such as teachers, police officers, and judges, from wearing items like hijabs, kippahs, or turbans. Advocacy groups are challenging last year's court decision that upheld the controversial bill. The court ruled that the law had serious and negative impacts, but was legal. The advocacy groups argue that the law infringes federal jurisdiction and is against the constitutional architecture of the country. Challenging the bill has been difficult because the Quebec government has invoked the notwithstanding clause. A new survey by Ipsos shows that Canadians have lower support for policies necessary for climate change than many other countries. The poll surveyed individuals from 34 countries and shows only a bare majority of Canadians approve of government subsidies to green technologies and modifying product pricing to make environmentally friendly products cheaper. On most other policy suggestions, support drops to less than 1/3. Sanyam Sethi, vice president of Ipsos Public Affairs, tells media source that the results were shocking. The results come as the 27th annual conference on climate change, or COP27, has started in Egypt. Canada ranks 10th globally in carbon emissions. 2 Muslim women are among the 6 recipients of the Order of Vaughan 2022 for their contributions to the city. Dr. Nazila Iskandarova is the founder of the Azerbaijani Women's Support Center. She is a registered psychotherapist and social worker and has authored numerous publications on violence against women and rape as a weapon of war. Hina Zahid is co-founder and director of Muslim Women of Vaughan. During the pandemic, she helped children and adults connect online. She volunteers at the Vaughan Food Bank, has organized park cleanups, and a backpack drive for children. The award ceremony Thursday was presided over by Mayor Maurizio Bevilacqua. At least 10 civilians have been killed and 75 others wounded after the Syrian regime attacked a refugee camp in Idlib with a cluster bomb yesterday. The wounded were taken to nearby hospitals. The Syrian regime lost control of Idlib in 2015. Regime forces, however, have managed to recapture dozens of villages and towns in the province since 2017, despite agreements that define Idlib as part of a de-escalation zone. Syria has been locked in a vicious civil war since early 2011 when the Bashar al-Assad regime cracked down on the pro-democracy protests. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and more than 10 million others displaced, according to estimates by the UN. And that's it for the news. Now, many say that we are currently living in unprecedented and challenging times. We are just recovering from a full lockdown during the pandemic, and now there seems to be rising concerns about the well-being and social development skills for our youth. To hear more on the topic, as well as some solutions, I am pleased to welcome a familiar face on the show, Brother Mohammed Maxwell Hassan, a public speaker and founder of Kalam Power. Welcome, Brother Mohammed, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be back here.
Brother Mohammed, I briefly mentioned this already, but what have you personally noticed in the communication skills of youth as they came out of the pandemic?
With the youth, a lot of times they haven't developed it as much as they could. Now, one of the common scapegoats that people tend to say, why are our youth not communicating very well, is technology. It's not the technology that's the problem. It's the lack of practice of socialization that's the problem. If you spend a lot of time online, that's one thing. But if you combine that with a lack of actual in-person practice, that's where the problems kick in. And it all starts with awareness, first and foremost.
Mhm. Now, some people say that going on technology makes for a quiet child, and then that quiet child is sometimes connected or thought to have underdeveloped social skills. But that's not always the case. Do you want to add to this?
Sure. I mean, like with technology, it's new opportunities. Technology is a medium, it's an instrument, it's a tool that you use. It's not necessarily, oh, because someone's constantly online, they're more quiet. Yeah, it facilitates more of that quiet nature because you're not really talking to your phone unless if you're having a conversation on the phone. You're typically scrolling, and so you're not actively voicing your opinions. You're typing in comments and things of that nature. So it facilitates more of that. But to simply say that it's going to develop a quiet child, I wouldn't say that to that level. It's more facilitating, but if you use it in a way, I mean, think of YouTube, think of all these other different sort of avenues that are now at our disposal where kids can be more creative than ever. It's just a tool on how you use it.
Mhm. Now, with schools going on strike, we see that our youth are going to lack some of those avenues for social interaction. As you said, is something very important to build communication skills. How can we encourage them, or even make the environment for them to build those skills then?
Well, we're in the blessing of the 21st century. I mean, we have the internet. So if let's just say it's unfortunate that in-person classes are at a halt and the environment isn't necessarily there, you still have the ability to do your own homework, do your own research, look into it. You know, when you really want something, you're going to go for it. And so what I would say as a starting point is to look online for communication training, things of that nature. I'll share if I can share one quick thing right off the bat right here, freebie. When it comes to structuring answers, someone asks you a question, how do you answer yourself in a way? Some people tend to go off the rails. It's very problematic. But if you can use something called the PrEP formula, PREP, point, reason, example, point. And so if you're able to use things like that and come across strategies, you may not get them in the classroom, but hey, Google's your friend in that regard to really say, hey, how can I still practice and go from there? It's just finding those strategies and making the most of it.
Mhm. And finding those strategies and the technology that we see in the 21st century. Now, for people that I come across who seem to be quite introverted, they often say that they can't talk because they don't know what to talk about. What would you tell these people who are struggling to find something to talk about?
The simple way is to be interested, not interesting. So sometimes there's this added pressure. I don't know what to say because I want to sound smart, but I don't know what to. If you're simply interested in what the other person has to say, find that common thread, find something of observation you notice, and that's an easy kicking off point. So, for example, if you see someone who has nice shoes, great. That's a conversation starter. Hey, great shoes. Where'd you get that from? I really like the way that those shoelaces are tied, for example. That's one way to launch it off. And one more strategy I can share with you in terms of how do you keep the conversation going, you can do some sort of association exercise. Association. Find a word and what does it associate with? And you can always have an endless conversation. So if you say, for example, if someone was to ask, what do you want to do this weekend? And someone says, well, I'm going to go to a restaurant. Oh, restaurant. That reminds me of another time when I went to this restaurant. And you see, you always associate. So you always have an endless amount. But it all starts from being interested in the other person as opposed to try to be interesting as a person.
And everyone has their own strategies. I know for myself, I often resort to talking about my hobbies as a way to bring up conversations, and it seems to spark it off from there. But I'm curious, communication is not just a skill of actually speaking, it reflects your mental state and involves body language as well. Keeping all of these aspects in mind, what skills do you think make for good communicators, and how can we exhibit them?
Ironically, it's listening. People tend to think that when in order to speak, you have to be this grandiose thing, have a microphone, and you need to talk, and you be. But ironically, it all starts from here. You know the common adage: you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. So you listen twice as much as we speak. We're in a world where people want to show and talk and say, you know what, I want to be that TikTok star or what have you, and they want to be in that spotlight in one case. but more often than not, the world is starving for empathy. The world is starving to be heard. And if you can be that person that people can go to and say, this person gets me, far more valuable than any other person that can just get on a mic and start talking.
Hmm. So communication works two ways then. It's not just about talking, it's also about listening. And that's very helpful for those introverted people then. I'm wondering, how can adults benefit from learning communication skills as well? You know, we often attribute it to being something that only young people have to learn. There's also some place for adults to learn, correct?
Oh, it's a lifelong process, you know, but it all starts in my line of work. What I noticed that it starts with that realization that, oh my goodness, I need to improve my communication skills. Here's a timeline of events. You have a kid happy to do show and tell. They get to high school, do a presentation, they start shivering. I don't want to do it. Since high school, they go, let's say, to college or university, no chances really to give presentations. So that is dormant for so long. Now comes a time where the adult is in a workplace environment. Suddenly they need to be in meetings, they need to present to their boss, they need to do this, and then they realize I don't have the skills in order to communicate effectively. I'm, withdrawn, or I just don't know how to express myself in the best way. So unfortunately, it's almost like you have to come to that realization on your own and say, oh my goodness, there's that roadblock. I'll give you a quick example of this. You're talking about adults. There was this one gentleman I know, he was in IT, and he clocked in and clocked out for 17 years. 17 years. Was happy with the skills that he had, didn't think much of it. 17 years of doing this. One day he was promoted to being vice president of his department. Now all of a sudden he has to deal with stakeholders, he has to deal with team members, they has to deal with running a meeting. I don't know how to do all this. And so it's only when you reach that point where you run face to face with it, that's all it is.
Mm-hmm. Now, from what I understand, your story reflects a lot of the story you just told me. I think in your bio, I saw that public speaking and communication skills didn't always come naturally to you. Can you share your own experience of how that process looked like?
Yeah, so sometimes I find that you don't pick your passions, but your passions pick you. And ironically, as I was going through life, I didn't really have much. I mean, I couldn't say I was athletic. I didn't have that going for me. I didn't have certain things, not necessarily the most popular kid in school. But I did notice, strangely enough, that when it came time for presentations, I kind of lit up. This is an opportunity for me to, in those few minutes, give some message to the audience, make them laugh, get them inspired, do something. And so connecting the dots backwards, through university, college, high school, as I was going through all those experiences, one constant thread remained, which is that presentations really were key. And so that's what I discovered, that public speaking is a treasure trove. It's an opportunity worthwhile.
Mhm. That's something I definitely relate to as well, but we can't discuss that any further. Thank you so much for your time today, Brother Muhammad. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Likewise, thank you.
You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. That's it from our Toronto studios tonight. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more Canadian Muslim content. Stay safe, and until next time.